And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. This is your host, Ben Jacks, and I'm coming to you from my normal location in the West Loop of Chicago, Illinois. It is Tuesday night, August 9th, 2016, and here's what we're going to be covering on tonight's episode. For this evening, we're going to break it up into three 15-minute segments. Part 1, we're going to talk about what's happened in the last month or so around the major leagues in terms of which teams are taking charge in the standings and how the Divisional and Wild Card races are shaping up. In the second segment, we'll cover the trade deadline, the major moves that were made to improve teams for the short term, as well as moves that were made to improve the farm systems of teams to get better in the long run, as well as teams that lost out of the deadline, that either didn't make any moves or made moves that may have not made sense to what their needs may have been at the time or did not help the ball club in general. And then in the third segment of this evening's episode, we're going to discuss the Hall of Fame induction from a couple weeks ago in Cooperstown, New York, featuring Ken Griffey Jr. and Mike Piazza. We'll also discuss the surprise retirements of two Yankee greats, as well as one of my favorite players in the game who has suffered a potentially career-ending neck injury. And then we will also talk about the firing of Twins general manager Terry Ryan and where they're headed moving forward with the structure of their organization in Minnesota. And I will wrap things up in connection with the discussion on Cooperstown and Junior and Piazza going in with the unveiling of my all-time team. So essentially, guys that I've seen either play in person or on TV in the last 20 plus years, I'm going to go ahead and unveil my all-time starting lineup. So to start off tonight's episode, we'll go ahead and jump in and talk right away about the developing races in both the American National Leagues in terms of the divisions as well as the wild cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the American League East. As we look at it this evening, Tuesday night, August 9th, it appears that it is a three-horse race in the AL East. The three teams that stand out, I think, to everybody at this point are the Baltimore Orioles, the Toronto Blue Jays, and the Boston Red Sox. The Orioles this year have been led by their offense, as one would expect. They got off to a great start because they got great production from their lineup, and that's due to the incumbents, Adam Jones, Chris Davis, a healthy Matt Wieters, and, of course, the young superstar at third base, Manny Machado, who's having an MVP-caliber season. They also have received a lot of help from newcomer Mark Trumbo, who has 31 home runs now. Traditionally, the Orioles are a pretty good defensive team. That certainly hasn't changed this year. And another thing to add to the Orioles has been their pitching has been better than people thought it would be. Zach Britton, already considered one of the better closers in the American League, possibly the best closer at this point, other than Andrew Miller. He's one of the top guys in the American League at this time. And Chris Tillman has pitched so well that I think you have to consider him in the Cy Young race. With an ERA in the high twos, and I believe his win total is now approaching 12 or 13 wins at this point here on August 9th, with about 50 games to go in the season. So he'll have a number of starts over the next 7-8 weeks here to try to push his win total towards 20 wins. And when you get in the high teens in wins, although I understand that the sabermetrics community does not necessarily frown upon, but somewhat look down at the win statistic. But it's still certainly a measuring stick for the voters for the Cy Young Award. So when you start getting into the high teens and wins, your ERA is around the twos, Chris Tillman will probably be in the race for the Cy Young come season's end. So there's the Orioles. They're at the top of the standings, and right with them, headed into tonight's action, they were tied for first place. I think they were a couple percentage points behind the Orioles, and that's the Toronto Blue Jays. The Blue Jays got off to a slow start, and they were lagging behind in the standings, not just because of their slow start, but that was accompanied by the Orioles' outstanding start to the season, especially in April. However, the Blue Jays have turned it on. They've received great pitching from the top of the rotation, featuring Aaron Sanchez, one of the young pitchers in the game. He is 11-1 with an ERA in around the 2.7 range. He's pitched really well as of late, and although there was some talk of him being removed from the rotation based on an innings limit, or there was a guess that there was an innings limit for him. At this point in time, that doesn't appear to be the case. And in fact, the Jays announced earlier this week that with the arrival of Francisco Liriano from the Pittsburgh Pirates via trade, they're going to go to a six-man rotation. So that should certainly help out the young Sanchez in maintaining his strong start to his season. In addition to Aaron Sanchez at the top of the rotation, it appears that Marcus Stroman is starting to get things back on track as we move into August. He pitched better in the month of July, and his stuff was never an issue. It was just maybe a mechanical flaw that may have been working against him, but it appears that he's starting to pitch better, and with the 1-2 punch of Sanchez and Stroman at the top of the rotation, along with the addition of Liriano and another veteran presence in R.A. Dickey, the Jays' rotation is in pretty good shape, and that only adds to what their true strength is, and that's their offense. Edwin Encarnacion now has 31 homers. Josh Donaldson having another very, very strong season. Many think that if the Jays are able to repeat as AL East champs, he's got a really good shot at winning the American League MVP award again. So they're right there in the mix with the offense and the starting pitching. In third place, you have the Boston Red Sox, who have brought up some young players. Andrew Benintendi, as Scott Van Pelt affectionately referred to him this evening on SportsCenter as Ted Williams. Maybe, I guess you can call it sarcastically referring to him as Ted Williams, but he's gotten off to a great start in his first 2 weeks in a big league uniform, hitting over 400. Young left-handed hitter out of the University of Arkansas, only drafted in the 2015 draft, so he's played a little over a calendar year of professional ball. So it'll be interesting to see how he comes along and develops, as the Red Sox certainly have one of the strongest young outfields in the game, with Benintendi in left field, Jackie Bradley Jr. in center, and Mookie Betts in right. So with the strength of that outfield, they still got Bogarts and Pedroia up the middle. David Ortiz at age 39 in what could be his swan song season is having one for the record books. This has to go down as one of the great age 39 seasons in the history of the game, right up there with, I believe, what Barry Bonds did in 2003 or 2004-ish. The OPS and other metrics numbers that Ortiz is putting up, along with the traditional batting average, home runs and RBIs, all very strong. It has him in a surprise candidacy for the MVP as we move forward to the through the last 50 games of the season or so. So moving on to the AL Central, the two teams to highlight in the Central have to be the Cleveland Indians and the Detroit Tigers. I know a number of people expected the Kansas City Royals to be there. The Chicago White Sox obviously got off to a strong start, but they have since faded, and now it has become a clear two-horse race as we move into the final stretch of the season here. For the Indians, they've played a complete brand of baseball, basically from about May 15th, May 20th on. Their starting pitching has been outstanding, led by Trevor Bauer, who has once again asserted himself as one of the Cy Young candidates, one of the many in the American League. The rest of the staff is still very strong, with Carlos Carrasco, Danny Salazar, and Trevor Bauer, among others. The two gentlemen up the middle that really are the backbone of the defense, and as well as two of the spark plugs offensively, Francisco Lindor and Chicago area product Jason Kipnis. They've done an incredible job offensively and defensively for this team all season long. It'll be curious to see how not picking up Jonathan Lucroy via trade from the Milwaukee Brewers affects this club in terms of their catcher production, which ranked as the lowest in the American League, or right at near the bottom as of the trade deadline. And it'll also be interesting to see how Andrew Miller fits in, coming over from the Yankees to be the backbone of that bullpen as their closer. So if he can do what he's done for the majority of his career, being a dominant left-handed reliever, with the Indians possibly having the best closer in the American League, that should really, really help them down the stretch, potentially turning them into a true World Series contender. Now, the Tigers have kind of snuck up on people in the last month or so. They've been essentially the hottest team in the American League since the All-Star break. They've been hitting the ball a ton. That lineup looks like they all hopped in a time machine and went back to about 2012, especially Miguel Cabrera, Victor Martinez, J.D. Martinez coming off the disabled list. Justin Upton has finally started to hit like they intended him to do so when they signed him in the offseason. Getting a lot of really good production from Nick Castellanos at third base. And the starting pitching has been a lot better than people thought it would be. Michael Fulmer appears to be a year ahead of where people envision him being. He's also in the Cy Young race, as is his veteran teammate Justin Verlander, the cat with 9 lives. It seemed like his velocity was gone at the end of last year. It has certainly picked up a tick and then some. In his now, I believe, his age 32 or age 33 season, he looked like he did a couple years ago. Maybe not as dominant as, say, 2009 to 2012, but still one of the best pitchers in the American League this year for sure. So with two of the top 15 or so starting pitchers and a juggernaut of an offense, the Tigers appear to be here to stay in both AL Central and AL Wild Card races. And so as we move on to the West Division, once again, that almost appears to be a one-horse race at this point. The Texas Rangers, on the strength of a couple of trades that they made for veteran outfielder Carlos Beltran from the Yankees and all-star catcher Jonathan Lucroy from the Milwaukee Brewers, with their offense and Cole Hamels being another Cy Young candidate, it appears that they're starting to pull away. They've beaten up on their division all year long, which has been a key to their success. They have a really dominant record, in particular over the Astros. They've played well against the Mariners as well, and they now hold a 7 to 7.5 game lead in that division, with both the Mariners, who have played better as of late, but they've been inconsistent, and now the Astros fading. It appears that when you look at the American League, there are 6 teams fighting for 5 spots for the playoffs. The Rangers are the clear-cut favorites in the West. The Indians and the Tigers are duking it out in the Central. And there's a 3-horse race out east with Toronto, Baltimore, and Boston. We'll be right back with our second segment of the evening, talking about the National League as well as the trade deadline.
Are you looking for a great way to promote your business? Is your beer league softball team looking for more recognition? Do you need airtime to destroy your political rivals? Then contact the Ben Jacks Podcast, and this space could be yours for a fraction of the price of those greedy corporate podcasts.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. This is your host, Ben Jacks, and it's Tuesday night, August 9th, 2016. And in the first segment of this episode this evening, we discussed the American League and where teams stand and which teams have positioned themselves for a potential postseason run. And after discussing all three divisions, we came up with 6 teams fighting for 5 spots. In the East, we had the Orioles, Blue Jays, and Red Sox. In the Central, we had the Indians and Tigers. And then out West, we had the Texas Rangers. So we shift our focus to the National League. And in the senior circuit, we'll start out with the NL East. As of right now, it appears that the 3 teams that are still in the hunt for either the division or the wild card are the Nationals, the Miami Marlins, and the New York Mets, the defending NL champs. With the Washington Nationals, they've built up a pretty strong lead in that division. I believe they're up 6 or 7 games now over the Marlins and the Mets. They've done it on the strength of their overall depth. They do have an excellent rotation led by Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg, who's racked up wins, strikeouts, and ERA along the way. ERA in a positive way. He has a low ERA, of course. This is a well-rounded team, obviously led by the superstar right fielder Bryce Harper. They've gotten good production all over the diamond. Definitely a team to be reckoned with. Wilson Ramos having a great year behind the plate offensively. It should be interesting to see if Dusty Baker's bunch can pull away in this division and set themselves up for long-term, down-the-line success in October as well. With the rest of the division, the Marlins have obviously been one of the surprise teams in the National League. I think a lot of people thought they'd be around a 500 ball club, myself included. I figured they finished in 3rd place because, quite frankly, the Braves and the Phillies are both clearly tanking this year, neither team being competitive. But it was a matter of whether or not the Marlins would be able to compete with the top 2 teams coming into the division this year, the Nationals and the Mets, and they have certainly done that. Their pitching has been outstanding, led by Jose Fernandez, who's had a great year. Giancarlo Stanton's starting to come around. Christian Yelich, Marcell Ozuna, all 3 of those guys have been really productive. And then, of course, there's the ageless wonder who comes off the bench for them in platoon spots and has had a great year. And that's the man by the name of Ichiro Suzuki. He just collected his 3,000th hit on Sunday in Colorado. But it's not just about the milestone. He's hitting well over 300, still playing very solid defense on the corners, and has certainly brought a certain amount of professionalism to this ball club. They, under first-year manager in Miami, Don Mattingly, and I guess you could say with the help of hitting coach Barry Bonds as well, this is a ball club that's really turned itself around. They are most certainly in the wild card race right now. Although the division may be a little bit out of reach, the NL wild card is certainly something that they are not strangers to. Look at 1997 and 2003. They won the wild card both of those years and ended up taking home the World Series trophy in late October of both of those years as well. So I'm definitely not going to go out on a limb and say that the Marlins are going to end up winning the whole thing, but it certainly wouldn't be a surprise with the star power that they have on the mound and in the outfield if they made some sort of spectacular run, won that wild card game, and then somehow ended up beating the Cubs or something in the division series, because it's baseball and anything is possible. So with that, moving forward with the rest of the NL East, the only other team that I would consider a contender at this point is still the Mets, and that's namely because of their starting pitching, even though they've suffered some injuries. Certainly Steven Matz and Jacob deGrom, and another ageless wonder, Bartolo Colon, and Thor, Noah Syndergaard. They still have some guys that can pitch. The offense has been really struggling as of late. A lot of injuries on this ball club. Yoenis Cespedes going down really hurt them. Their inability to trade for Jonathan Lucroy. I do apologize. Not Matthew Lucroy from the Twins back in the early 2000s, but Jonathan Lucroy from the Milwaukee Brewers. The Mets were considered another suitor. However, the rumor that I had heard about their trade for Jonathan Lucroy was that they were looking to trade, make a catcher-for-catcher swap, trading their own guy, Travis d'Arnaud, for Lucroy in like I said, a straight-up catcher deal. Of course, the Brewers turned that down. They probably laughed about it and turned it down. At this point, with David Wright going down and them bringing in a guy like Jose Reyes, who not only had a bevy of off-the-field issues that led to a long suspension in the first half of the season, but also, he's a much older player at this point, not nearly as productive as he was in his first stint in Queens. This is a club that, like I said, really hurting for offense. And at this point, they're kind of on the periphery of the playoff race. In the NL Central, I kind of hesitate to say that there's anybody else in it besides the Cubs. The Cubs are going to win the NL Central. They have the biggest lead. They're the most complete team in the National League, and they're clicking on all cylinders, having won their 8th game in a row tonight against the Angels. Behind a really strong outing from John Lackey. They've been getting outstanding starting pitching in the second half of the season. They're hitting really well as well. Of course, Chris Bryant right in the MVP conversation for the National League right now. This is a ball club that, like I said, is clicking on all cylinders. They're the clear-cut favorites in the Central. And with them shoring up their bullpen by adding Aroldis Chapman from the New York Yankees in a trade deadline deal, I think that they've kind of solved all of their issues at this point. They appear to be the strongest team in the National League, and at this point, they're probably the strongest team in baseball. And I don't see any challengers in the NL Central for sure. The Cubs should walk away with this division, winning it by 8 to 10 games, no problem. And at this point, with 70 wins here on August 9th, barring injury, catastrophic injuries and an unforeseen slump, they're going to eclipse 100 wins this year as well. Probably the only team in baseball that's going to eclipse 100 wins. So that's where the Cubs stand. And with the Cubs being the best team in this division and dominating this division so much, it's only going to hurt teams like the Cardinals and the Pirates. Now, the Pirates, by trading Mark Melancon and Francisco Liriano, it's pretty clear at this point that they're kind of attempting to retool. I'm not going to say rebuild because when you have Garrett Cole in your rotation and Andrew McCutchen in center field, it's not going to be a full rebuild. Those guys are both elite players in their prime, but at this point I'd count them out because they're beginning to go through a minor retooling process. The Cardinals, I would say, are still in it. They're still in the wild card race, along with Miami and another team that we'll talk about out west, the Los Angeles Dodgers, here in a minute. But the Cardinals, they appear to be, once again this year, kind of outdoing themselves. In terms of their roster strength, I don't consider them talent-wise to be a top 5 team in the National League, and I didn't at the beginning of the year. So I'll say that the Cardinals right now, they have a veteran core that knows how to win, obviously, with Yadier Molina and Matt Carpenter and some of the other guys that they have. But I just don't see it happening this year for the Cardinals. So, like I said, they're kind of in that category with the Mets where they're on the periphery of the playoff race, but that's about it. And then out west, the Giants have been up and down in the second half of the season, but they're still certainly the favorites to win that division, especially with Clayton Kershaw going down with the back injury right before the All-Star break. They made some interesting moves to strengthen their ball club, getting Matt Moore from the Tampa Bay Rays and Eduardo Nunez from the Twins as well. Buster Posey having another really strong year, even though he had that really craptacular slide at third base on Monday night in Miami where he almost broke his damn face, but still one of the best players in the game and putting forth another MVP caliber season in the Bay Area. So the Giants, to me, appear to be the clear-cut favorite to win the NL West, especially with the Kershaw injury. The Dodgers feel like they're still in it. I mean, they did add some pieces at the deadline, getting Rich Hill and Josh Reddick from the Oakland A's to improve their club, at least in the short term. Both Hill and Reddick will be free agents at the end of the year. So we'll see how that works out. But they do have a young player in the name of Corey Seager, who's having a great season at shortstop, likely to win the National League Rookie of the Year. Just having a tremendous year for a young shortstop, hitting a lot of home runs, playing very good defense. Adrian Gonzalez, I think, will get it going in the second half. He's always been a second half player, so I expect that to happen. So if I have to say right now, if you look at the National League as a whole, out of the 15 teams, I'd say there's about 7 or so that you can consider to be in the postseason mix. 3 in the NL East, and that's Washington, Miami, and New York. 2 in the Central, Chicago and St. Louis, and 2 out west, San Francisco and Los Angeles. Although I do kind of consider the Mets and the Cardinals to be more peripheral postseason contenders than to be really in the thick of it. Not so much because of how it reflects in the standings right now, but because of the talent base. I don't think that those two teams have enough talent, especially offensively, to make serious runs at postseason play this year. So with that, we go ahead and move forward to talking about the trade deadline, the winners and losers of the deadline this year. Certainly some of the things that jumped out to me were the Jonathan Lucroy deal that went awry in Cleveland. I certainly thought, like many people, that Lucroy would end up in Indian at the deadline because they had made the trade for Andrew Miller on Saturday night, July 30th, and then when most of us woke up Sunday morning the 31st, there had already been near confirmations that Lucroy was going to be moving from Milwaukee to Cleveland. However, there was a snag in the deal regarding, of all things, with a guy like him, of his caliber, playing time issues. He was concerned about, I don't know if it was more so where he was going to hit in the order or how many games he was going to catch, but there was an expectation from the Indians, allegedly, that he was going to be playing a number of games at first base. And with Lucroy playing at first base, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I know that you're trying to save his legs, but if you're trying to save the guy's legs and you still want his bat in the lineup, it's the American League. Why wouldn't you just DH the guy? So I felt like the Indians lost out there, but they were certainly winners in getting Miller. The big team that won out as a result, of course, was the Texas Rangers. The Rangers getting not just Lucroy, but they also were able to deal for Carlos Beltran, immediately strengthening their everyday lineup to make it more formidable with Prince Fielder going down to injury. So we'll take a short break here, and then when we get back, we'll wrap up our discussion on the trade deadline and move into discussion about the Hall of Fame.
Are you looking for a great way to promote your business? Is your beer league softball team looking for more recognition? Do you need airtime to destroy your political rivals? Then contact the Ben Jacks Podcast, and this space could be yours for a fraction of the price of those greedy corporate podcasts.
And welcome back to the Ben Jacks Podcast. This is your host, Ben Jacks. It's Tuesday night, August 9th, 2016. And in the last segment, we were discussing the National League standings and where things stood with all the races. And we moved into discussion about the trade deadline. And with the way things are standing around the big leagues right now, I thought the deadline was certainly, it had some interesting moments that I thought might have changed the course of how these races are going to shape up. As we were talking about the winners and losers of the deadline prior to our last break, I started off by mentioning both the Cleveland Indians and the Texas Rangers. I thought that the Indians could have won out more had they not essentially blown that discussion with Jonathan Lucroy and his representation regarding his playing time. I thought it was quite frankly, a very simple and straightforward non-issue. With a guy like that who has a lethal bat and is considered one of the better two-way catchers in all of baseball, to me it makes no sense to ask a guy like that to play a different position at all during the season. I would have thought that it would have been a foregone conclusion that on the days that Lucroy wasn't going to catch for the Indians, he would just DH to keep his bat in the lineup. That didn't appear to be the case, so they're going to be moving on. And with that, I think they had a good deadline trading for Andrew Miller, but they certainly could have won out more by getting both him and Lucroy at the same time. So the team, as a result, that ended up winning out was the Texas Rangers. They got Lucroy and Carlos Beltran in separate deals, of course. Beltran coming over from the Yankees and Lucroy coming over from the Brewers. That, like I said, improved their everyday lineup, makes them a very formidable offensive team. And with the pitching they already had in place, led by Cole Hamels, the Rangers seem to be in really good shape to not only pull away in the AL West, but make a serious run to possibly get to the World Series this year. Another team in the American League that I thought won out, and they won out because they were involved in trades with both Cleveland and Texas for different reasons, for a different reason why they won out, and that's the New York Yankees. The Yankees, in my opinion, and in the opinions of many around the game, especially those who make their money following and reviewing and ranking these farm systems, they'll all tell you that the New York Yankees went from maybe a middle-of-the-pack system because it was getting better, because Brian Cashman and the front office, they were paying more attention to the draft in recent years. So it's probably about a middle-of-the-road system to suddenly being a top three, maybe even the best farm system in all of baseball. By trading Andrew Miller and Aroldis Chapman and Carlos Beltran, those three trades alone allowed them to net a number of the top prospects in the game. When I look at the fact that they got Gleyber Torres back from the Cubs, a 19-year-old kid who's, I believe, in high A ball at this point, maybe in double A, shortstop, one of the highest ranked position player prospects in the Cubs system before coming over to the Yankees. Getting Billy McKinney to play in the outfield, another highly ranked minor league prospect from the Northsiders. And then in the Indians deal, I thought they really made out well getting Clint Frazier, who appears to be a power-hitting, right-handed hitting corner outfielder as well. Looks like he's going to be an elite player. By getting those guys, they also got Dylan Tate from the Texas Rangers, who was a number 4 pick in the draft last year. He's had a down year this year, I guess, in the minors. But you're still talking about the number 4 pick overall, a potential. Usually when you draft a starting pitcher at that pick, you're talking about a guy who's potentially ace material. They got a number of other guys, Justice Sheffield, I believe. They got him. I know that, like I said, they already had a strong system in place with Gary Sanchez, who's now with the big league club. They also have Greg Bird, who's hurt this year, but looks to be the starting first baseman in the future. Aaron Judge, big time power hitting right fielder. They have a number of prospects in place. Blake Rutherford, a kid that I was really fond of in the draft this year, center fielder of the future, in my opinion, for the Yankees. Jacoby Ellsbury, Jason Hayward type of player, potentially down the road. So when you add all those pieces up, it allows the Yankees to do a couple different things. They can do what teams like the Cubs and Astros have done, which is wait for those guys to develop and come up, or they can use those guys also like the Cubs have done and like the Red Sox have done, and use them as trade bait to bring in other high-priced stars that are already proven players. So they have a number of options now with one of the top-ranked farm systems in all of baseball. I also think that the Milwaukee Brewers made out very well, trading for some prospects, getting some pieces in return for the Lucroy deal. The Texas Rangers, obviously, in order to pull off both the Beltran and especially the Lucroy deal, they gave up a number of prospects, but given the thought process of trying to win in the short term, I think the Rangers won out. And then, of course, in terms of building up their farm systems, you now have to look at the Brewers and the Yankees as having the two best farm systems in all baseball. So those were my winners. The Cubs as well, they won out because they probably got the best closer on the market in Aroldis Chapman, or one of the best. The only other guy that would have been considered would have been his Yankee teammate Andrew Miller. So I think the Cubs, they definitely solved one of probably their only glaring issue at this point was their bullpen. So getting Chapman, who's an elite closer, is really going to help them down the stretch. Giants did well in getting Nunez and Moore in separate deals. That should certainly strengthen their ball club. Getting Moore, another pitcher, and giving up Matt Duffy, who, for the Rays' sake, will hopefully help them in the future. I think is an interesting deal. But Matt Moore should certainly add to what is already a fairly strong San Francisco Giants rotation. One team that obviously kind of stands out to me as a team that lost out at the deadline was the Chicago White Sox. They decided to stand pat, and now granted they did make one trade. They moved Zach Duke to the St. Louis Cardinals for outfielder Charlie Tilson, who was considered a fringe starter, potentially a fourth outfielder, depending on who you talk to in farm systems, in farm system rankings. I don't know how that was going to. I don't really know how to evaluate a guy like that doesn't project to have much power, but has a lot of speed and certainly has the ability to become a decent offensive player, especially if he can hit for contact. But at least this year we won't know, because Tilson went out and got hurt in his first game in a White Sox uniform and tore his hamstring, and he's out for the year. So at this point, the Sox had the opportunity probably to move Chris Sale. And honestly, a Chris Sale or Jose Quintana deal would have really put the White Sox in a tough spot with the fan base and obviously with their bottom line as well. I don't think that they received the offers that they were desiring, obviously, in return. The Red Sox, the Dodgers, and the Rangers were among the teams that probably had the pieces to put together a trade to make a move for him or either guy. And also, they were the only contenders that could make a claim on a pitcher like that. So, that being said, it was disappointing as a White Sox fan to not see us bring in any new young players, at least ones that are big league ready. I would have hoped for, personally, I was hoping for a Chris Sale deal to Boston that would have included Andrew Benintendi or Yoan Moncada or both if Dave Dombrowski had been willing to do so. It was just a disappointing deadline because, like I said, we're looking at the same subpar, bland product that we were looking at before the All-Star break. As they say in sports, you don't want to be bad and boring. And that's certainly what the White Sox are right now on the days that Chris Sale and Jose Quintana don't pitch. So on the days that they pitch, it's interesting, but other than that, it's a very dry product to watch. And although you never want to make a trade just for the sake of making a trade, the White Sox would have benefited, I think, from injecting some new blood in the organization. So that's probably my main loser at the deadline. I think that the Mets deal for Jay Bruce is too little too late. Their offensive situation is already in pretty dire straits due to some injuries. And although he's had a pretty good year, I don't know if Bruce is really even a short-term answer for the New York Mets at this time. So I guess we'll have to see how that works out. But at this point, that's my take. I think that you look at the Brewers and Yankees as being winners because they rebuilt their farm systems, or in the case of the Brewers, they continued to build their system up. The Indians, Cubs, Giants, and Rangers all got a lot better to improve their ball clubs in hopes of making a run at winning a World Series this year. And then you have a team like the White Sox who lost out because they already have a bad situation in place with too many incumbent players that haven't produced, but they didn't do anything to at least change the makeup of the 25-man roster for the most part here at the deadline. So, and now, with that being said, it's time to move into my discussion about the Hall of Fame. So this year, we had Ken Griffey Jr. and Mike Piazza go in to Cooperstown. Both guys very, very deserving. Two of my all-time favorite players. They went in, Piazza going in as a New York Met, and of course Ken Griffey Jr. going in as a Seattle Mariner. Griffey with 600-plus home runs. I believe he won 10 consecutive Gold Gloves in one stretch. The 1997 Most Valuable Player Award winner. Won the All-Star Game MVP a couple times. Home Run Derby a few times. For my money, he was the best position player that I've ever seen. Barry Bonds is pretty close, but I always felt that Junior was the better defensive outfielder, especially playing a prime defensive position like center. He was always a joy to watch. And to me, there's a parallel between a guy like Junior's career and what a guy like Mickey Mantle, my favorite historic player of all time, what he did. So when you look at Junior in the 90s, that's comparable to Mantle in the 50s in terms of the overall stardom and the numbers speaking for themselves. A number of 40 and 50 home run seasons on both sides from both Griffey and Mantle. I think it's pretty comparable, actually. He didn't have the longevity that a guy like Willie Mays had because of injuries similar to Mantle, but he was still certainly one of the all-time greats. And we'll be right back to finish our discussion on the Hall of Fame. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the final segment of this evening's episode of the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. This is your host, Ben Jacks, and in the last segment, we discussed the trade deadline, the moves that were made, and the winners and losers of the deadline. And also, we started talking about the Hall of Fame. As you all well know by now, Ken Griffey Jr. and Mike Piazza both went in to Cooperstown 2 weeks ago, with Griffey going in as a Mariner, as many would expect, and Piazza going in as a Met, also to no one's surprise. I briefly, before the last segment ended, mentioned that I thought there was a parallel to Ken Griffey Jr. and Mickey Mantle's careers. The numbers are pretty similar, although Jr. did hit roughly 100 more home runs or thereabouts. He had a tremendous offensive burst midway through his tenure in Cincinnati in the mid-2000s, which catapulted him into the running for 600, and then, of course, he hit his 600th with the Reds in 2008. Ended up with about 630 for his career, as opposed to Mantle, who hit about 540, I believe. The similarities there, a guy comes up and has a lot of hype and media attention around him, and he lives up to it right away and puts up big numbers early in his career. Like I said, Mickey Mantle owned the 50s. Ken Griffey Jr. owned the 90s. Both guys were early on in their careers on the ascent into their primes prior to major injuries, and then both guys broke down right about the age of 30 or so. For Junior, that would have been right around his trade to Cincinnati in the year 2000, and for Mickey Mantle, it was right around 1961, the home run chase with Roger Maris. He had suffered a number of debilitating injuries before that, but 61, he also had a number of injuries that sidelined him for the World Series that year, and although I think he actually played briefly in that World Series, but the similarities are certainly there in terms of the production dropping off quite a bit in that second decade of both of those players' careers. But to the folks that watch them in their generations, the generation that grew up with Mantle in the 50s and 60s swear by him as maybe their favorite player, even more so than Mays. For my generation, we feel the same way about Ken Griffey Jr. I notice a lot of my friends on social media who really don't follow baseball that much anymore, we're still expressing fond memories of watching Junior play as a kid growing up in the 90s. Even if you weren't a Seattle Mariners fan, you still followed that team because Ken Griffey Jr. played for them. He had a tremendous impact on, like I said, on my generation in terms of what he meant to the game and pop culture, mixing that with sports. I mean, he was just, easily the most popular baseball player of that decade, and of that time period. And his numbers matched, like I said. Hit over 300 in many seasons. A career total of 630 homers. I believe he got pretty close to 2,000 RBIs, if not eclipsing that. He's got to be up there in runs scored. Again, he won double-digit Gold Gloves, double-digit All-Star appearances, won the All-Star Game MVP, won the 97 regular season MVP. All in all, one of the great players of all time, and certainly, in my opinion, the greatest player of my generation. Mike Piazza, on the other hand, did not come into Major League Baseball with the same type of fanfare. Griffey was the number 1 overall pick in his draft class in 1987. Piazza was a 62nd round pick, and that might have been mainly because his father was good friends with Tommy Lasorda. As the story goes, Lasorda was Piazza's godfather, so that probably helped him get drafted out of Miami-Dade Junior College as a first baseman, actually, in 1988. 20-year-old JUCO first baseman, and then he ended up moving behind the plate because they thought that he potentially had the skill to do so. Worked out that he did, and Piazza became one of the great offensive catchers of not only his time but the history of the game. He ended up hitting more home runs than any other catcher in the history of baseball, and played a pivotal role in helping both the Dodgers and the Mets make numerous playoff appearances in the mid to late 90s, moving into that 2000 season when he helped lead the Mets to winning a National League pennant. Piazza and Jr., I thought both of their speeches were really interesting to listen to. Both guys were obviously emotional. I thought the one connection that I found most personal and just enjoyable to listen to was to hear those guys both talk about the influence that their fathers had on them growing up. Junior obviously had a father who played Major League Baseball and had him around the clubhouse a lot. Similar to Adam and Drake LaRoche, but like not nearly as annoying. And the dad was a good player, and the son ended up becoming a great player. So definitely the quality of baseball play was much higher with that father-son combination. But I know that Junior expressed that not only did his father playing in the big leagues help shape him as a big league player, but the responsibility that his father took, having Junior at a young age, showed him the responsibilities of what it meant to be a responsible person and just being a good person. So I thought that was really touching. And then, of course, to hear Piazza speak in Italian to his father, who's an Italian immigrant, I thought that was really unique and obviously a very emotional experience for him and his family. And then, of course, his connection with Mets fans was truly remarkable. You knew that the Mets fans were going to show up because, actually, strangely enough, Piazza is only the second Met to go in the Hall of Fame wearing a Mets cap. The only other guy is Tom Seaver. So they had obviously been waiting, 25 years or so. I believe that Seaver went in the early 90s on first ballot, and they had been waiting a long time to watch one of their guys go in, and they definitely showed up in large numbers to Cooperstown to watch Piazza go in. So that was all really cool to see. And then, of course, Junior being the first Mariner to go in with the Mariner cap on. You saw two fan bases that don't receive a lot of fanfare, especially when it comes to the Hall of Fame, show up in big numbers and show up proudly. So that was really fun to watch. Just to transfer into what I had mentioned earlier in the podcast, I know we don't have much time left here, but I'm going to go ahead and push back my discussion on Terry Ryan's removal from the GM position, and we will briefly mention the guys that are retiring at the end of the episode. But for right now, I do want to briefly unveil my starting lineup for my all-time team. as we mentioned, Piazza and Jr. both going into the Hall of Fame. And yes, they both are on my all-time team. I'll start at third base, go around the horn, mention my catcher and designated hitter, then go to the outfield, and then wrap things up by giving you guys a starting right-handed pitcher, a starting left-handed pitcher, and a closer. So at third base, I went with Chipper Jones of the Atlanta Braves. Chipper had an amazing career as a switch hitter and perennial Gold Glove winner at third. Was the epitome of a 5-tool player, switch hitter, like I said, 400-plus home runs, won a couple batting titles, so he could hit for average, hit for power. Great defensive player, great leader in the clubhouse for the Braves. Very instrumental in that Braves dynasty of the 90s, winning the division title every year, getting to the postseason, and of course winning that World Series in '95, his rookie year. Put up really big numbers in the postseason that year in particular, but in general, he had great playoff numbers. The bigger the game, the better he played usually. So Chipper to me was a no-brainer. I saw him play in person in Atlanta at Wrigley a number of times. I should say with Atlanta in Wrigley Field. I saw him play a number of times. So he was certainly a treat to watch in person, and best third baseman I've ever seen. Shortstop, I went with Derek Jeter. For me, the reason why I left Alex Rodriguez off this list was because I wanted to go with guys who had primarily played a certain position for their entire careers. A-Rod was kind of in between. It's not quite a 50-50 split. I believe that his years with the Yankees actually at this point outnumber his years in Seattle and Texas, where he played exclusively at short. But I went with Jeter because of the iconic player that he was in New York, winning 5 world titles, being a numerous-time Gold Glove winner at short in his own right, challenging for batting titles year after year, and of course, again, like Chipper, a guy who played in October a lot and played really well in October. So for me, Jeter was a treat to watch at short. He's my pick at that position. So at second, moving over to second base, went with Robbie Alomar, primarily with the Indians and the Blue Jays and Orioles, among other teams. Switch hitter, best defensive second baseman I've ever seen, and he could also hit for some power and steal some bases. First base, going with the guy who's still currently playing. That's Albert Pujols of the Cardinals and Angels. Primarily his work with the Cardinals separated for me as being an all-time player. 2 World Series rings, the leader of that ball club, 500-plus home runs, was actually a really good base runner earlier in his career, has always been a 300-plus hitter. I think he's going to have a decent shot at 3,000 hits as well. Miguel Cabrera is a close second for me, but I went with Pujols because playing in one city for a long time, like St. Louis, and winning 2 titles down there really helps. Even though Miggy did win one with Miami early in his career, I'm picking Pujols because he was such an iconic player for such a long time, especially in the 2000s. Behind the plate, going with Mike Piazza, like I said, greatest offensive catcher of all time, and actually rated from a sabermetric standpoint to be much better defensively after his career than folks gave him credit for early on in his career. Great with the Mets, great with the Dodgers. I believe he either won an MVP or came pretty close at one point in time. He was always in the high MVP votes. Perennial all-star, just one of the all-time greats behind the plate. And then my designated hitter, to no surprise to anyone, I would think, is Frank Thomas of the White Sox. 93 and 94 most valuable player. hit 500 plus home runs, a career 300 hitter. Was the face of the White Sox franchise in all the years that he played here. Personally, a favorite of mine. Got a chance to meet the guy, like I've said before, and class act both on and off the field. Truly one of the greatest player in the history of the White Sox franchise. And his World Series ring in 05, even though he didn't play in that World Series, certainly helps his case here. We'll be right back to announce my outfielders and pitchers for my all-time team.
Are you looking for a great way to promote your business? Is your beer league softball team looking for more recognition? Do you need airtime to destroy your political rivals? Then contact the Ben Jacks podcast, and this space could be yours for a fraction of the price of those greedy corporate podcasts.
And welcome back, folks, to some bonus coverage of the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up with the remainder of my all-time team, and then I'm going to close with some notes on three guys who are retiring here as this 2016 season comes to a close. So in the previous segment, I mentioned that I wanted to unveil my all-time team tonight, and I started it off by going around the horn in the infield, as well as presenting my catcher and designated hitter. I went with Chipper Jones at third, Derek Jeter at short, Robbie Alomar at second, Albert Pujols at first, and Mike Piazza at catcher, with Frank Thomas as my DH. So going into the outfield, my dad and I do disagree here, I guess you can say. I thought for sure that he would pick this guy, but he went with Rickey Henderson and said, and there's no shame in picking Rickey Henderson. In my opinion, he's one of the top 20, top 30 position players of all time, especially if you look at his offensive output over his career. But to be honest, I didn't get a chance to really see Rickey Henderson in his prime. Putting Rickey Henderson on this team would be akin to putting a guy like Ozzie Smith at shortstop. You know, a guy who I saw later in my career, but I wanted to put guys on this team that I saw at least through some of their prime. So for me, I chose Barry Bonds as my left fielder. Obviously, the most controversial pick on this team because of his well-proven at this point steroid and HGH use, especially if you look at the numbers late in his career, and just how his body was structured at age 39, 40 years old. Being that muscular and generating that much bat speed, we all knew something was up, or at least now we know that something was up. And it's certainly a controversial pick because if you looked at his body type in the late 80s, early 90s, it was certainly not that of a guy who was just a big slugging corner outfielder that couldn't run well. That's the player that he became later in his career, but I'll always remember Barry Bonds as a guy who could hit 40 home runs and steal 40 bases. I do think that had he stayed off of performance-enhancing drugs and played the game naturally, he would have had a shot because his body type wouldn't have changed. But he still would have, I'm sure, taken care of his body just as well and not suffered any debilitating injuries, hopefully. I think he would have had a shot at being the only man in the history of baseball to hit 500 home runs, steal 500 bases. That would have put him in a category by himself, and at that point he would have solidified himself as the greatest offensive force the game has ever seen. So, in my opinion, if he had, decided not to be so concerned with the home run records and focused more on something like the 500 club, that would have made him a truly unique all-time player and maybe the greatest ever. But with that being the case, with all the controversy aside, he's still a damn good player. Perennial Gold Glover in left field, which is rare, especially at that time because there wasn't Gold Gloves. The Gold Gloves were not given out by position in the outfield. They usually would take 3 center fielders or 2 center fielders and a right fielder with a bunch of assists. That's how Gold Gloves used to be distributed. But Barry Bonds was able to crack that and win a number of Gold Gloves in left. And he was the consummate base stealing threat. And, of course, a 30, 40, and then eventually 60 and 70 home run hitter. So Barry Bonds is my left fielder. And then, of course, in center, picking Ken Griffey Jr. Jr., like I said, is the greatest position player I've ever seen in my life. I saw him play a number of times, Seattle, Cincinnati, and with the White Sox. Saw the ascent and descent of his career when he was the best player in the world, and then when he was a broken down guy at the end of his career. Always played the game hard, was nothing but class on and off the field, 600 plus home runs, perennial all-star, MVP, all-star game MVP, double-digit Gold Gloves, played the game with joy and loved it, and you could tell that was the case. For me, that's the easiest pick on this team. So Ken Griffey in center field. And then moving over to right field, I'm going to go with the guy who I mentioned earlier getting his 3,000th hit, and that's Ichiro Suzuki. Also of the Mariners primarily, I would assume that he'll go in as the second Mariner whenever he decides to retire, and assuming Edgar Martinez isn't in the Hall of Fame at that point. So I'm going to go with Ichiro in right, 3,000 hits in 16 seasons. That's absolutely amazing considering he came over at age 27 from Japan. Not only was he a great hitter for contact, but he could get a big hit to drive in a run or two if he needed to. He could hit the ball at the ballpark. Great base stealer early in his career especially. One of the best leadoff men I've ever seen. And then, of course, his work in right field is legendary. One of the greatest defensive right fielders I've ever seen in my life. Other than Vlad Guerrero, there's not too many other guys that compare. Just a rocket for an arm. An extremely accurate arm. Got rid of the ball quickly. Got great jumps in the outfield. Incredible range. Could play center when needed. This guy was everything that you would ever want talent-wise in a ball player. And from all accounts, I've heard he's a great teammate. So, and it seems to be showing now, especially in Miami, as I think his work ethic and just leadership by example, if anything else, have reflected positively towards those younger players to help that ball club become a contender down the stretch. So Ichiro at age 42 still has another shot at getting back to October and maybe playing a World Series. So that's my other active player on this roster, Ichiro in right field. And then on the mound, I went with Pedro Martinez as my right-handed pitcher and Randy Johnson as my lefty. Starting with Pedro, his 99 and 2000 seasons in particular stick out to me. 1.74 ERA in 2000. That number just sticks out to me so much because in an era where the league average for ERA was like above 4, Pedro had a 1.74 ERA. Hard fastball, reaching up to 97, 98, especially in Montreal early in his career, and then the great changeup to work in tandem with that. Just one of the great two-pitch combinations in the history of the game. And, of course, everybody knows that he was an elite competitor. The bigger the game, the better he pitched. I'll never forget, for instance, for me, the most memorable Pedro moment has to be 99, Game 5 of the Division Series against the Indians, where he had gotten hurt earlier in the series. They weren't sure if he was going to be able to pitch in Game 5. And then he came out of the bullpen with the game tied and in the fourth inning, and through 6 innings, start the fourth inning, the remaining 6 innings of the ball game, he threw a no-hitter. I don't know if it was 18 up, 18 down, but it was pretty close to that. So that was just, for me, that'll always stick out as the definition of a clutch pitching performance. That was just outstanding what he did in the 99 Division Series. And then he had a number of great moments in the rest of his career against the Yankees and other teams where he pitched really well. Even though the 2003 ALCS, Grady Little let him in there too long and left him in there too long, and he ended up losing that. They ended up losing that ball game. But other than that, Pedro was just such a dominant pitcher especially in his prime when he was healthy, and he still had the life in the fastball. It was just truly a sight to see. Speaking of life on a fastball, my lefty, Randy Johnson, had very little control early in his career, but once he was able to figure out how to spot that fastball, and especially that slider working away from lefties, one of the most dangerous pitches in baseball, just thoroughly unhittable, especially in the late 90s in Seattle, and then going to Houston for a pit stop in 98, and then moving on to Arizona, where he would eventually win a world title with Curt Schilling as the 1-2 punch there in 2001. Big unit was just as good as it got, throwing a no-hitter in Arizona at age 40, racking up strikeouts. I believe he had a 19 or 20 strikeout game in his career, maybe a couple of times. Just truly dominant statistically, psychologically to hitters, just intimidating as hell. And as a fan, it was fun to watch him pitch in general. It was frightening to watch him pitch against your team, and just a truly special guy to watch in his career. Probably the last 300-game winner we'll ever see. And then my closer, to wrap things up here, I decided to go with Mariano Rivera of the Yankees. I think that's a no-brainer fastball cutter guy, the greatest cutter in the history of baseball. And you talk about being able to pitch in the clutch. His ERA and save percentage in the postseason, especially in the World Series, truly stuff of legend. And the Yankees certainly wouldn't have been the dynastic Yankees of the late 90s without Mariano Rivera. So that's how I will close out my team, with the greatest closer of all time, the last man to wear the number 42 full-time, Mariano Rivera. And to close tonight, I'd like to mention the farewell of three ball players who have certainly had different trajectories in their careers, but all ended up having great careers nonetheless. We'll start with Mark Teixeira, who's decided to hang it up at the very end of the season with the New York Yankees. I think that Tex, even though his numbers kind of went downhill at the end, had a very productive career as a switch-hitting Gold Glove first baseman, one of the best defensive first basemen I've ever seen. Had a number of really big years early in his career in Texas, a couple pit stops in Atlanta and Anaheim, and then went on to win a world championship in New York in 2009, his first year in the Bronx. Had a great career. I don't know if he's Hall of Fame caliber, but had excellent numbers, hitting in the high 300s in home runs, I believe. Like I said, perennial Gold Glove winner, All-Star, world champion. So he'll certainly have a case. It'll be interesting to see if he gets in, but age has caught up with him, and he will be missed, I'm sure, in the Bronx, but he did have a great career. Prince Fielder, we don't know if he's exactly retiring yet. Conflicting reports today about the neck injury, but for me, I'll always enjoy watching him. Watching him hit from the left side and run the bases for a big fella. He was an enjoyable player to watch, especially early in his career in Milwaukee. Him and Ryan Braun combined to form a pretty fearsome duo. So that was certainly fun to watch. Things kind of went downhill with the Tigers, but he did have a very, very productive career. But like I said, jury's still out in that one. We'll see how the Rangers address it and how Prince addresses it and whether or not this thing is confirmed. So play that one by ear. And then when we come back here, I'll close it out with talking about the last man who's retiring, why this is the most interesting retirement case of them all. And then we'll close out the episode for the evening. And welcome back. I swear to God, this is the final part, the final segment of the show for the evening. Obviously, we had a lot of catching up to do with taking some time off in the last month, but I wanted to get through everything from the deadline to my all-time team with the Hall of Fame and catching up on the standings over the last month. And we've also had some retirement announcings. So like I said in the previous segment, just to close that out, we talked about Mark Teixeira retiring for sure. That is confirmed. He will retire at the end of the year, and that he has had an excellent career, but we'll see how the voters in Cooperstown view it. Prince Fielder, very enjoyable player to watch. Put up some big years, especially in Milwaukee. But when he got to Texas, the injury bug bit him, and we'll see if it's a career ender with the neck injury or if he'll be able to come back. The guy who I wanted to close this episode out with is, of course, Alex Rodriguez. A-Rod had the press conference on Sunday, the very tearful press conference, where he announced that he will be retiring from baseball Friday night when the Yankees play. I am not sure. I don't even know who they're playing at this point because the Yankees are starting to fade from the divisional race, and they obviously made a bunch of moves to look towards the future. But A-Rod is retiring, and he will become a special advisor to the Yankees for the 2017 season to work with the minor league players at their spring training site in Tampa, Florida, and then continue to work with the young players as the season progresses. For me, this is interesting because A-Rod has had one of the most fascinating careers of any baseball player I've ever seen. He went from being loved to hated to kind of liked at the end of his career. Obviously in Seattle especially, and then even in Texas after he signed the major contract. People still, widely recognized him in a positive manner. They loved him in Seattle because he was in that group with Derek Jeter and Nomar Garciaparra as the young, great shortstops coming up in the future. Of course, Nomar got traded from the Red Sox the year they won the World Series, so he didn't even get the ring. And then after that, he started having a ton of injuries, and his career was cut short. But he had a hell of a prime before that in Boston. And then, of course, Jeter went on to further fame in New York, putting together what is a surefire first ballot Hall of Fame career over 20 seasons played in the Bronx. A-Rod, in a 22-season career, 23-season career, has put up Hall of Fame numbers for sure, winning numerous MVPs, 696 home runs, over 3,000 hits, over 2,000 RBIs, a career .290 hitter, Gold Gloves at both shortstop and third base, I believe. He's done everything in the game that you can possibly do from an individual standpoint and a team standpoint after winning that World Series in 2009. Of course, his career is going to be tainted. He admittedly did steroids numerous times throughout his career, and there's going to be forever an asterisk by his name in the record books because of that. And also, not just because of the PED use, but his relationship with the media has been up and down at best. His relationship with fans has been worse than that. He's always been considered a kind of a selfish, arrogant, me-first guy. Didn't get along well with teammates at times in his career. It's strange because I heard Rick Sutcliffe on SportsCenter earlier tonight with Scott Van Pelt talking about how earlier in his career he was this lovable kid in Seattle that would be willing to do an interview with anybody, loved signing autographs for the fans, just really understood the image part of the game and how that reflected on him. So he always tried his best with that. And like I said, and obviously Sut backs this up, the money didn't change him when he moved to Texas. He was still like that in terms of being willing to sign autographs, do interviews, and everything that comes to being a superstar player. Things really changed for A-Rod in terms of how people viewed him when he got to New York. I think people thought it was kind of crazy that he signed the deal in Texas in 2001 for that big of a contract, but, you know, I think that the average American does respect someone who can go out and determine their own worth and make as much money as they can, because I guess that's capitalism at its finest. But not to get into a political or economic discussion here, the thing that really changed in New York is his relationship with the media and the fans. He went from being a guy who, he made a lot of money, but he was still a popular player because he was really good, and he was willing to work with his teammates and the front office and the fans and the media. He obviously drove that trade to be made to New York because he wasn't satisfied with the current team that he had been on and how things were going record-wise, so that was disappointing to him. And people thought it was a selfish, spoiled brat move to sign this big deal in Texas and then realize the team wasn't any good because they had spent all the money on him, and then to force a trade to New York to go play for the juggernaut Yankees. So people thought that was really a selfish move. And then when he got to New York, ironically enough, his friendship with Derek Jeter became strained because they played together, but A-Rod was a different type of player and just a different type of person than he had been earlier in his career. And I think it was difficult for both those guys to deal with each other at times. And just in general, he wasn't good with the fans. He wasn't good with the media. He wasn't good with even, there were stories down to the guys that worked in the clubhouse that he didn't treat them well. Standoffish towards his teammates. Didn't work well with Joe Torre. Just a number of bad reports coming out of New York about A-Rod personality-wise. And then, of course, there's the steroid thing lingering all over that. So, all the different instances of admitted steroid use, and then he comes back, he wins the MVP in 2009, and then he has another issue with PEDs in 2012 and 2013, to the point where he gets suspended for a year in 2014, which was pretty disastrous. That looked awful on his part. And then he came back last year. He had a good year last year, and he seemed like a different person too. He seemed much more remorseful of his past, and the fans in New York welcomed him back. His teammates welcomed him back. He had a much better relationship with the guys in the clubhouse. I think his relationship with Joe Girardi has certainly improved in the last couple of years as well. And so he, like I said, the trajectory of his career has been especially interesting because he came up as this beloved, hyped-up prospect that turned into a superstar that was a true fan favorite in both Seattle and then in Texas. And then people turned on him really quickly when he got traded to New York, and he caused himself to get turned on by from the fans by acting the way he did, and of course the PED use on top of it. But Long story short, I think A-Rod is one of the more intriguing stars of in the history of the game, not just in this generation, but of any generation, because of the twists and turns in his career, make it especially interesting. We will see if things do change with the Hall of Fame and whether or not they start letting some of these PED guys in. But right now, with the 600-plus home runs and 3,000-plus hits, World Series ring, MVPs, All-Star appearances, and Gold Gloves, all the accolades and awards that A-Rod has received over his career, at this point it doesn't mean anything in terms of the Hall of Fame vote. I don't think he's going to get in. I'm still on the fence about these guys and whether or not they should get in, because you could see there was an immense amount of natural talent there with guys like A-Rod and Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, but they committed what has now been seen as one of the ultimate sins in sports, which is cheating. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds, but I do think for sure that Alex Rodriguez, like a number of people in the media have said, love him or hate him, you're never going to forget him. So one of the more interesting careers in the history of baseball will come to an end Friday night in the Bronx as Alex Rodriguez steps away from the game as a player and moves on in an advisory role, which we'll see how that plays out as well with the Yankees. So I'd like to just close by thanking the listeners and I guess viewers on YouTube as well for listening to the podcast so far, and thank you for those of you who have stuck it out through what is now looking like a 90-minute episode here. Like I said, we had a month of catching up to do, and I'm glad I got a chance to finally sit down and do so. I do apologize for those of you who may have had issues with the audio. This evening I decided to come out on the porch here on my balcony and go ahead and record the podcast outside. So that's some of the noise that you're hearing is some of the beautiful noises that we hear around the city of Chicago at night. So once again, thank you everybody for listening to this episode, and we will be back with a new episode very soon to recap the month of August. And after speaking with executive producer Kevin McGrath, I'd also like to bring up the subject of great baseball documentaries, rank some of my favorites of all time, to get into a discussion about that. And we will also at some point talk about great books written about baseball as well. So and just to wrap things up as well, if you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, please send that towards us on the either on my personal Facebook page, or text me it, or send it to the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast Facebook page as well. So for my executive producer, Kevin McGrath, this is Ben Jacks signing off on the Ben Jacks Baseball Podcast. We'll see you guys in a couple weeks, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the month of August, and going ahead and signing off here. Good night.